Hello, everyone. It is so exciting to see you all. Doug and I are, and Hunt, who will be coming a little bit later today. We are just thrilled to get a chance to meet all of you and interact with all of you. There were a lot of applications submitted for this boot camp, and we were kind of looking at everyone's files very carefully, and we're just very excited. This is also the second time that we're running this boot camp. You know, the first time we ran it, it was just so much fun and a huge success, and we learned so much from everyone there, and we're all excited to learn from you this time around. Before turning it over to Doug, let me just make a couple of notes about why I am so enthusiastic about this boot camp and about behavioral public economics in general. One, I think that behavioral public economics is just a great area to work in, and it's a fantastic example of how to combine two fields, public economics and behavioral economics, in a very even-handed way, and generate very strong gains from trade. Because on the one hand, there are a lot of policy discussions in the real world that explicitly or implicitly implicate the possibility of consumer mistakes or non-standard preferences. And so to engage in those kinds of real world policy discussions, whether you believe in behavioral biases or not, you kind of have to take seriously the possibility that they might exist. And so it is necessary for many of these real world scenarios for public economics to incorporate ideas and tools from behavioral economics. On the other hand, for those of you who are coming more from a behavioral economics background, I found public economics to just be a fantastic disciplining device. You know, rather than kind of taking the latest and greatest psychological bias from psychology and then really stretching your imagination to figure out what might be an economic application. You know, when you have a real foothold in public economics, the benefit is that the questions you're going to work on are going to be questions that are very broadly relevant, both within the economics profession and outside the economics profession. And then, of course, there are large gains from trade, from exchanging different kinds of tools, and it goes both ways. So, you know, for example, the sufficient statistics approach in public economics is, of course, much more broadly relevant beyond just that field. You know, and in my case, I've kind of taken the tools that have been developed for sufficient statistics applications and policy evaluation scenarios and actually applied those same tools to propose, for example, new approaches to estimating time and consistency in various kinds of field settings. So I think there are very strong gains from trade. The last thing I just want to say is that I think it's very valuable to get intellectual experiences and the kind of exposure to outside of your home institution. You know, just as an example, you know, in my case, one of the first exposures I've had to behavioral public economics was when I was watching Doug present his famous paper on behavioral welfare analysis joint with Antonio Rangel, which was actually back when I was an undergraduate. You know, and then when I went on to graduate school, you know, most of the advisors that I had, you know, they worked, you know, on different topics, you know, very different styles in some ways from that kind of framework, but it really stuck with me, you know, and I think it is, you know, has really contributed to the kind of path that I'm on right now. You know, and so I hope boot camps like these can really help students get exposed to a variety of different kinds of intellectual experiences that will hopefully help guide you in your careers. So with that, let me turn it over to Doug to make some remarks about behavioral public economics.
Oh, good morning, everyone. Let me, whoops, I need to tell them that we got it. Okay, it's great to see all of you here. Is this too loud or is it okay? It's okay? Because, yeah, I don't want to be blasting you out of the room. It's great to see all of you here. I just want to add my agreement with Dmitry that, you know, we're just thrilled to have all of you here. The last one of these that we ran, we thought was enormous fun, and the feedback that we got from the students seemed to indicate that they thought it was enormous fun too, and that there were all sorts of interesting topics. So I hope that you have the same experience, and we're really looking forward to having the chance to talk to each of you individually. I know that, you know, some of you are interested in behavioral economics already. Some of you are interested in public econ already. Some of you are interested in the intersection of the two already. And some of you are just exploring, and that's great. Whichever category you're in, we're happy that you're here. We hope that we're going to be able to inspire you a little bit by the time that this is over. The wonderful thing about behavioral public economics is that this is kind of still a wide open field. You know, there's a lot of areas in economics where the fields are very thoroughly plowed. People have just been working on this sort of stuff for less time. So there's more to do, and it's really important. These ideas are getting attention in public policy circles, and it's critical that we have the tools and the research to provide advice. So this is just a great area to be working in. We started last time. We're going to do the same thing this time with just a little synopsis of the history of behavioral public economics, how it evolved. And I really think of it as involving three waves. So I'm going to talk about the three waves of behavioral public economics. The first wave is origins of the field and just kind of exploration. People thinking, well, what kind of interesting questions could we pose here? So the earliest precursor was back in the early 1980s. This is Sheffrin and Thaler's work, where they started to explore a model of self-control. This is well before behavioral economics was a thing. And this was greeted with a ton of skepticism, not to mention a few chuckles that Dick Thaler has not forgotten about. But it was an important paper that did get a lot of attention, very provocative. It's not the way we think of these issues now. They didn't formulate the issues in a manner that was particularly lasting, but they opened a lot of interesting questions, and they raised some public policy issues. In particular, if you read their original paper, they were interested in pension policy. They were interested in questions about what do we do about the fact that we think that people save too little, which, by the way, that phrase, you have no idea what kind of anger that generated in the 1980s when people say saving too little. Well, what do you mean by too little? We've got this framework of revealed preference. People choose what they want. You can't say that it's not enough because they chose it, right? So that sort of opened up some provocative perspectives and led to a lot of interesting discussions and subsequent development of these ideas. The literature, as people explored it, applied different ideas from behavioral economics to different problems at that point. Perhaps most impactful during the 1990s was David Leibson's work on imperfect self-control, and I've listed here his paper on golden eggs and hyperbolic discounting, which actually came from his PhD dissertation. This used what's now called the beta delta model, which many of you have probably seen. It's standard exponentially discounted utility at the rate delta, but a factor beta always gets applied to the entire future, and beta is less than 1, which has the effect of causing the decision maker to place extra weight on the present. So Leibson adopted that model. A lot of people think it came from, in economics, people tend to associate it with Leibson. This was a model that had been developed in the psychology literature, but not applied in economics. So David took that model and he applied it to economic problems and was the first to really do so in a systematic way. So he developed implications for savings policies. And you look back at his original work, you can see that there was policy analysis there. So that's one branch that people started to explore. Another branch that people started to explore is policy analysis involving what we're going to be calling context-dependent choice. So
you're not sharing the slides on Zoom currently. Because you're trying to zoom this out, correct?
we are, yes.
Yeah, so this isn't where are we? And full screen mode is where?
I searched for it too. It's in menu.
Great. Sorry, everyone.
I'm glad to see I'm not the only one who did that.
Where are we?
View, and then full screen. Yeah. Full screen.
Maybe I admit.
There we go. Okay.
All right, cool. It should be. Yeah, just hide this. Great, cool.
All right. So context-dependent choice. This refers to the fact that our decisions seem to be sensitive to aspects of the choice environment that arguably are not relevant to the experience that we're choosing. And an example of this is the work of Madrian and Shea, which has received a lot of attention about the impact of default options in 401k plans. I'll talk about this in a little bit later today. These are situations in which, instead of having to affirmatively enroll in a pension plan, you are automatically enrolled with a positive contribution rate. So the default changes from 0 to 3%, doesn't change your options, doesn't change the menu that's on the table, but it turns out it affects what people do. A third area that people started to explore was misunderstandings and mistaken beliefs. And this is where I kind of started jumping into this literature by working on financial sophistication and financial competence, and looking at how financial education can improve decision-making. And again, we're back to this issue of what do you mean by improving decision-making? Revealed preference and all decision-making is. If you think that there's a possibility that people don't understand what they're doing, which behavioral econ is very open to, then all of a sudden there is scope for having policies that improve decision-making skills. And then finally, another branch of behavioral economics was quite interested in social motives. And so when you look back at the literature in the 80s and 90s, you see people start to incorporate those notions into policy analyses as well. Jim Andreoni wrote his very famous work on giving with imperfect altruism, impure altruism, which has implications for charity. It has implications for neutrality of public debt. And then I've also listed here one of my papers on Veblen effects. So this is signaling kinds of ideas that Veblen thought that people were signaling their wealth through their consumption choices. And in this paper, we formalized that and then explored implications for policy involving the luxury tax. Okay, now we come to wave 2. And in wave 2, we're beyond this initial exploration. We've agreed that there are a lot of interesting ideas here that we need to dig into, but now how do we do it? And all of a sudden, people start worrying here about deep and difficult methodological issues. So you see a couple of papers that I've listed here. One is this paper by Gould and Pessendorfer, well-known paper called The Case for Mindless Economics. Which was a reaction to where the literature was going at that time, where people were saying we need to do things like use fMRI to figure out what's going on in people's brains when they make decisions in order to better inform our models. And they came out and said, no, that isn't right. Economics uses choice data and only choice data. Choice data can't be used to show that choices are mistaken. You just can't go down that path. That was the case that they laid out in that paper. They did that at a conference, and I've listed the conference here. It was in 2007 at NYU. It was a conference on the foundations of positive and normative economics. Of my various experiences in this profession over the last 4 decades or so, that conference stands out in my mind as one of the highlights in terms of my intellectual experience, because like everybody was there, everybody who has been serious about working on this field. And there was a tremendous amount of excitement. I mean, people understood there are new things happening. We're arguing about how to do it. And people came out with all of their views about what the path forward should look like. It was a very exciting event to be involved in. And there was a volume that was produced from that conference. This was one of the papers in it. It did get a lot of attention, mainly by stimulating a lot of debate. Most of us disagree with that paper. Most of us who work in this field disagree with that paper, but it was extremely provocative and helpful by virtue of challenging us, forcing us to refine what it was we were trying to articulate and why it was coherent. The other paper that I've listed here is one by Kosegi and Rabin on choices, situations, and happiness. This is a less known paper, but I take it to be really important because it's basically an indictment of choice-based welfare economics in settings where you have behavioral agents. It's saying, we don't think you can do it. And it introduced an observation that since then I've taken to, in the literature I think now is referring to as the non-comparability problem. And so I'm going to be talking about the non-comparability problem in a little bit. So now you have these fundamental methodological issues arising about how should we be doing this. We can't just wing it. We can't just go, okay, I'm looking at this policy problem and I know what the right normative standard is. People should save more. Well, where does that come from? Okay, how do you justify that formally, right? So now at this point in time, 20 years or so ago, we're seriously starting to wrestle with the methodological issues about how this field is going to move forward. This is where much of my own work has focused and continues to focus. And I've listed here some of the papers that I wrote in this area. The first one was an analysis of addiction, behavioral model of addiction, really a reaction against a famous paper by Becker and Murphy called Rational Addiction, which we thought was simply the wrong way to think about addictive behaviors. So we adopted a behavioral perspective and spun out policy implications that were based on the notion that some of the decisions people were making were mistakes. And that paper got a lot of challenges from folks like Gould and Pessendorfer along the lines of what do you mean by mistakes, which we then tried to formalize. And the next paper that's listed here is the paper that Dmitry referred to. This is the first one where Antonio and I came out with what we thought at the time was a complete framework for thinking about welfare. Since then, I've realized that it has to be extended, enhanced in a variety of different ways. Dmitry and I have this paper called Behavioral Public Economics in the Handbook of Public Economics that surveys some of these methods. Even now, that's a little bit old, but it gave at least a quick synopsis of where things stood at that point in time in terms of methods. Now we're really into wave 3 of the development of this field, which is implementation of the methods as well as their refinement. And so there's a lot of policy analyses out there now involving contexts in which we think that people make mistakes. I've listed a series of them. Chetty, Looney, and Croft on tax salience kicked off a literature that Dmitry is going to talk about. And then, Hunt and Dmitry have been at the forefront of making contributions in this third wave. So I've listed some of their contributions here, including to contexts that involve social preferences. So that's kind of the overview of how we got here and what the field's doing now. So I think that's it for the opening remarks.